So today I want to talk about really the bread and butter of meditative investigation, and that is thoughts. Understanding the anatomy of thoughts will greatly help in deconstructing your experience so as to alleviate suffering and to not buy into the stories of your mind. Initially, when we are very mind identified and we're not meditating, we're not practicing as much, you can imagine you're in the cinema and you're watching a film, and you know that feeling of like when you're watching a movie, you're so engrossed in the story that you almost become the story. You are in the narrative. I remember in 2014 when the movie Interstellar came out and I watched it in the cinema. I remember having that experience when I was like in the cinema, but I was so infatuated with how amazing that movie was that it absorbed me completely into the story, and it felt like 3 hours just went by like that. Before we start doing any sort of investigation into mind identification, that is sort of that's the way that we're engaging with the world. We're like fully in the story. So then we might do a mindfulness practice, like mindfulness meditation practice. Like I started with Headspace, for example, and we start deconstructing, we start pulling away from thoughts. And you start to see them like the classic, like clouds in the sky, right? But what we're doing there is, rather than being in the narrative, all of a sudden we realize that we're actually in the cinema. So have you ever had that experience when you get pulled out of a movie, like it's just boring or something, and you get pulled out of it and you realize like, oh, it was just a movie the whole time? Oh, okay then. So that's what you're cultivating when you understand the anatomy of how thoughts are operating in your mind at increasingly subtler and subtler levels, which I'll go into in this video, all of the different categories. And there may be more, but this is what I've found to be true in my experience. You start to have that experience when previously things would really trigger you in daily life. You just see that they're like an empty mirage on the screen. They're nothing to be worried about. And this just keeps getting more deeper and deeper and deeper, and helps uproot significantly so much of the buy-in that is created through thought that makes us suffer in experience. Because what we find is like thought is pretty much constantly, like this is the way mind identification works. We absorb it through our parents, we absorb it through our peers, and it's basically the hardware, the operating system that most of the population is running on. And it's absurd that we don't question it. No, like barely anyone looks in these places. I mean, it's becoming more and more prevalent, but to actually look at thought and slow down and like deconstruct like what the hell is going on here that's creating so much suffering that I'm buying into constantly. So it's a very worthwhile practice to know what exactly is going on there. So let's get into that now. So the first category is mental images. This is pretty straightforward, and you can think of it right now. If you think of a mental image of an apple, can you bring up a mental image in your mind right now? Some people have a condition where they actually can't see mental images. So I think that's like 1 in 10 people, something like that. But when you bring up a mental image of an apple, you can sort of see that in your mind's eye, right? Just like you can bring up a picture of like, I don't know, the Queen of England sucking on her thumb or a lake or a tree. Hopefully you're doing this right now. You can actually bring up mental images and see these mental images in your mind's eye. But notice that they're all made of the same stuff. It's all made of consciousness. It's all made of the consciousness material. You can sort of see as you alternate from mental image to mental image, even though the content differs, the substrate, you could say, that sort of makes up that mental image stays the same. And this is really significant for people who are sensitive, people who are interested in waking up, to be able to see this. Why is it valuable to be able to see that a mental image of your boss yelling at you at work is good to see? Is because until then we're just in the movie screen, and our whole physiology is being affected by this mental image. So what we're trying to do, we see this mental image of our boss yelling at us at work, for example, that just may spontaneously arise. And then we're like, oh, through insight, now we can see that, and we pull back through training our attention to look at thoughts skillfully. And then we're sitting in the cinema, and while the mental image may still affect our body mind, we may still feel strong emotions, we're then not going to keep buying into the on-ramp of thought that will then continue on after that. Now, practically speaking, for you, if you're watching my channel, you probably meditate. And when you meditate, this is where this will probably come up a lot, is you'll be sitting and you'll start seeing like mental images, like, I don't know, sexual fantasies, or what's going to happen later in the day. You name it. Your mind is a creativity machine and will keep spitting these things out. So bring that curiosity to examine like these mental images, and you just get curious with them. Like, what is that? Like, why is there so much buy-in to that? And wow, it feels really real. Like, it really took me there for a sec. Like, I was meditating, I was focusing on my breath, I was focusing or resting my attention into awareness, and then all of a sudden I was lost in a mental image or fantasy for like 20 minutes. Or maybe not 20, but 5 minutes, maybe 20. So yeah, just keeping that curiosity to be like, what is that? And this gets subtler and subtler. So I'm increasing the levels of subtlety with each example. But mental images also go as far as things like, if you're imagining say you're meditating and you can feel your hand on your leg, you may actually be able to conjure up a mental image of your hand resting on your thigh. And the way the mind works, it's pretty magical. We sort of have this mapping process that goes on, this body mapping process, and we don't even realize that whole process is thought. So if I have a mental image of my hand, I take it has a sense of location to it that my mind also artfully creates. Like, it feels like it's down there and there's a mental image of it. And it creates a sense of realness to our experience. But if you think of, for example, like a blue dragon, notice that same substrate of thinking of a thought of a blue dragon is the same as a mental image of a hand, right? So this is where like curiosity and play comes into the awakening and deepening process and the spiritual process, is because we start to deconstruct everything that we thought we knew. Okay, so the next category is words. So words, it's pretty straightforward, and it's so straightforward that we might misconstrue or think that it's not even a big deal, because we're so used to thinking with words that it really just almost creates our reality until we start getting curious about it. There's a really good scene from a movie that I love that was recommended by Angelo Dilullo called Revolver, that I remember watching. And it has this awesome scene in it where the protagonist basically realizes through his accomplices, the people accompanying him in the movie, he's taking himself to be his whole life, his narrative.
Don't let them play head games with you, Jake.
Is it me that's playing head games with you, Mr. Green? You've heard that voice for so long, you believe it to be you. You believe it to be your best friend.
But when he realizes that, it's a holy shit moment, because when we deconstruct thought, again, we're unhooking from that intense narrative, and we're becoming more present and seeing reality in an unfiltered way, not in a fantasizing way, and we're just right here with what's actually going on in experience. So, for example, a thought might say, as words, what am I going to eat today for lunch? Or, man, what my boss said yesterday was just so shit. And then we might also have a mental image of the boss at the same time, but these words are coming along simultaneously, all in the realm of this conscious space. Or, God, I've got so many things to do today. Right, so if we had that thought, God, I've got so many things to do today, we have that mental thought, then what we can notice is, yes, while it may have an effect on the emotion body, again, if we're just dialing it right in to presence, we just see that thought, just like a cloud in the sky, almost like you pick it out, the words, you pick them out of the sky energetically. You can almost like, you see if you can feel that. Grab the words out of the sky and you just look at them closely, and then they just dissolve. So all of that psychosomatic stress that we keep buying into, when we keep believing these words and these thoughts that come up, can be largely dissipated when we just bring a curious attention to it. And again, this gets subtler and subtler. For example, if we feel an intense emotion, let's say we have an argument with somebody, you're feeling a sensation in your body, so a sensation arises, and the subtler invocation of thought in that instance might be, so you're feeling the sensation, and then the word thought might come in, like, I can't handle this. And that thought of I can't handle this is a very odd but very real thing that can arise in experience. But when we notice that thought, the more that we attune our attention to this space in consciousness, we notice that. You just notice that I can't handle this, and then it just dissolves. Just like the what am I going to do today thought, the larger, more gross thought that was quite obvious to us, the words. If we see that I can't handle this, which takes a subtlety of attention, granted, and sometimes it can't really even be seen, it can almost be felt. But if we see that, it's just like, oh, there's just another thought. Okay, what's more primary is this experience of intense emotion. So now I can just feel that and be with it. So we're pulling apart all of these extra layers of thought that add to amplifying suffering when we just look closely and clearly. And in the same realm of subtlety, we can look at how we label things in our experience. So, okay, if you think of a baby, a newborn baby that's born into the world, do you think that baby has any notion of what a tree is, or what a pencil is, or what a phone is? No, the baby just has, you can even see it in their eyes. They have this sense of just complete awe and wonder, just looking around, like just completely engrossed with reality, because it's so new, it's so fresh. But what we do is when we grow up, we learn all these concepts. So, for example, these labels like tree. But if you notice in the same way, if you're attuning your attention in that same space of thought that arises a thought, what am I going to eat today for lunch? Or the subtle thoughts of, I can't handle this. If you're feeling and you're sensitive to feel into this space, even the thought of tree, if you look at a tree, it's not actually capturing what's really right in front of your face. What's really right in front of your face is sort of the way that a newborn baby would see reality, unfiltered, not labeled with anything. So if you strip away the label of tree, or pencil, or iPhone, what's left is unfiltered reality. So why is this useful, right? Because like you're thinking like, okay, like Sam, I'm suffering, right? Like I don't care about all these cool little quirky investigations. Like what's the implication of that? The implication of that is the more that you're peeling away these layers of thought just with natural curiosity, by being like just examining, so words, you're peeling away all of the layers that add resistance to experience or unnecessary baggage through thought that creates so much suffering. For the big ones are the ones that entail resistance. So I can't handle this, for example. When we realize that we actually can handle it by pulling that thought and seeing it clearly just with curious attention, then we start to actually feel a much deeper peace in our experience. So if you're feeling like intense contractions and like painful emotions in your jaw, neck, chest, heart, and you're feeling these emotions and all this like, oh man, like I just can't do this, and you're pulling those apart, it's just reducing your suffering. Or if you're ruminating a lot about the past, something that happened yesterday, or the future, and even what's going on in the present moment, by like having labels for experience, for example, that, oh man, this is unpleasant, I don't like this. If you're reducing those labels by naturally bringing curious attention to them, just seeing them as fabrications of the mind, you're more in the present moment. You're just right here. And you're more likely engaging with the sensory domain, like sensation, sounds, smelling, tasting, rather than fixating on rumination and the endless narratives that the mind will tell you. Now, the third category I want to drill in a little bit deeper, and this is a kind of fun one. So this is in non-conceptual thought. These sorts of thoughts become apparent often the quieter your mind becomes, the non-conceptual thoughts. So these are thoughts like the sense of self, the I am thought, I exist. So if you relax your mind, if it's quiet enough, you can sort of feel into experience in the same sort of area in your mind where these thoughts arise, like, what am I going to have for lunch? Or mental images of, what does my boss think about me? Or mental images of your boss yelling at you at work. In that same space in consciousness, which you can feel, thoughts may be arising about the sense of even being an individual self. The feeling and the subtle thought-based construct that arises in the mind of I am can be noticed, and then you can be curious about that as to what it is, bringing self-inquiry to that. Well, who am I then, if I can notice a thought and a feeling intermixed together that creates a sense of being a separate self? But thoughts go subtle as well, like even the thought of monitoring experience, monitoring how things are going in your meditation. I like this, I don't like this, this is good, this is bad, this sensation is pleasant, this sensation is unpleasant. These sort of non-conceptual thoughts can arise and you can sort of feel them in direct experience, while also feeling how they sort of arise from the same space in consciousness where those other more gross thoughts like mental images or words may be arising as well. So you can just sort of bring that curiosity to feel for these thoughts. I remember that was a big revelation for me. Like, monitoring is also a thought. I heard my teacher, Angelo, say when I was on a silent retreat. And that was a big revelation. I was like, holy shit, yeah, it is. When you look closely and experience, don't just take my word for it, but actually looking and experience, or Angelo's word, looking and experience and seeing like, oh, even monitoring, is that a thought too? Like, I actually have to verify it in my direct experience. But that takes just slowing down, being silent, and bringing curiosity to the experience. Now, a big, juicy non-conceptual thought as well. And there's sort of overlap between these. You may be picking up on overlap between mental words and visual images as well. There's overlap between these and the non-conceptual thoughts, but I wanted to create a subcategory for these because they're a big deal in a way. Thought of time is a big creator of suffering. Time being an illusion, because the only way there can be time is if we're reflecting on the past. This happened at 12 o'clock. Or the future, this is going to happen at 12:05. But if the present is at 12:02, and we're just right in that moment, this is a bit theoretical, but there's just slices of time, isn't there? There's just moment. Thought of 12 o'clock, that happened a couple minutes ago, for example. That's not happening right now at 12:02. or the thought what's going to happen in the future at 12:05, that isn't happening right now either. What's happening is we're having a thought from 12:02 about the past and about the future. Bringing this into a practical sense in your experience, because again, this can get really conceptual and then we can latch onto these concepts. For example, if we are feeling pain in our experience, I like to bring it to pain because that's what we can relate to as spiritual seekers. We could have a thought about, man, when will this anxiety end? Or when will this depression, when will this sadness end? When will I feel more joy? But what we're doing in that process is, especially with like anxiety, that was a big one for me, and it can still come up, is rather than being in that present moment, so to refer to that previous example of 12:02, I don't know why that came to me, but 12:02, we're in that present moment, we're feeling like the body is a bit dysregulated. Where our mind uses time to create a lot of suffering is it will reference a previous experience, like, man, this anxiety has been going on since 12 o'clock. Or maybe, let's extend that out for this example, 11 o'clock. And it just keeps on going on and on and on. And now it's 12:02 and I'm still feeling it. Like, it just won't go away. But see how when we create that huge bridge of time from 11 to 12:02, our mind creates this subtle overlap where it feels like it almost amplifies the suffering, because we feel like we've been stuck in this huge continuum of time. But what is really happening is there's only this one slice of time in the vertical experience right now. And this is a profound practice, because rather than, or it could go further down the other way too. Like we're thinking about, oh man, I'm going to be anxious at 12:05. It's just going to keep staying here. And then we're amplifying and building, adding on to resistance of what's just right here in the moment. So really this is just bringing a gentle, natural curiosity and funneling attention back into what's most immediate. We're pulling away from that movie screen that we're so bought into through our upbringing, through cultural conditioning. Man, the way people communicate is like we're always talking about the past or the future. So it's so embedded in our culture that the buy-in to want to believe these thoughts about time, about our sense of self, about our, to be monitoring our experience to make sure we're safe, these subtle, non-conceptual thoughts, and frankly, all of these thoughts that I've been talking about, there's so much buy-in to want to believe them because everyone else is doing it. But if we're interested in reducing suffering, we don't need to stop that. And there's nothing wrong with thoughts. But if we can Velcro and unhook from them, we suffer less. So I wanted to finish up with like an example, practical example. So, because this can be philosophical, but you can sort of feel into these things in your direct experience, which I would hope you would do from a video like this. Otherwise, it just becomes more thought that you're not seeing as, like, knowledge is just really a thought too. Like, oh, you remember that video where Sam talked about how mental images can arise, and then you tell all your friends about it, but really you're not even looking in your direct experience. You're just regurgitating this new amalgam of thought that you've accrued. So it has to be pulled into direct experience. So I thought it'd be cool to talk about a couple of examples that are somewhat relatable. Imagining you're having a breakup with a partner, breakup with a girlfriend, for example. So let's say you're just sitting, you're just going about your day, and this is pretty fresh, you've just broken up with somebody. What happens? You have a mental image of your partner. We feel in the body this sadness, this really intense sadness in our hearts. Because we're still getting used to this concept of de-identifying from thought, we then think, man, okay, I'm so sad now. So that's a word thought. I'm so sad now. I can't handle this. What can I do to get away from this? You can sort of see how our mind, rather than seeing the mental image of the partner arising and then just seeing it and being curious, like, oh, look at that, there she is. And damn well I know there's there's pain in my experience. I don't like it when non-dual teachers just say, that's just another thought, right? Just de-identify from the thought. That's just another thought, and then all your suffering will go away. I think, yeah, that's true. You want to reduce the resistance by seeing clearly the thoughts that are arising. But then, what that does, in my experience, is that brings you more directly into the experience of what's actually going on. So you might feel that sadness, and then there's just the sadness. And then if you're particularly astute, then you're subtly dropping away the concept of time. Oh, this has been going on for so long. God, it's been so long since we last spoke, right? Which adds in that dilation of time, which then amplifies the suffering. So then you're just coming back into the immediate experience again, the feeling of the sadness in your heart. And you're just feeling that full on, moment by moment, just staying in it. That's what's immediate, that's what's primary. It's like a superpower to be able to know what thought is, and it's crazy that so many people, probably a huge culture, because it's so enmeshed in our culture to use thought as a communication medium, that it's so easy to buy into it. So if we just bring this curiosity without rejecting thought, and we'll slowly deconstruct it from our experience and deepen an insight and unhook, dispel mind identification, so that we can go about life with more grace, ease, insight, and wisdom. So I hope you found this helpful. Like the video if you did. Helps out the algorithm, helps me out, helps draw like-minded people like yourself if you're watching this video. And smash that subscribe button. But yeah, I'll talk to you soon.